Part 1, the ordinary life. His name was Marcus, and before the diagnosis, his life looked like everyone else's. He woke up early, drove to a job he tolerated but didn't love, came home exhausted, and repeated the same routine day after day. He had a wife named Alina and a young daughter named Sophie who was only 6 years old at the time. Marcus wasn't unhappy exactly. He was simply asleep, the way most people are asleep, moving through life on autopilot, assuming there would always be more time to chase the things that actually mattered. More time to travel. More time to spend with his daughter. More time to finally start the small business he had dreamed about for years, but never had the courage to begin. He believed, like most of us do, that tomorrow was guaranteed. Then one ordinary Thursday afternoon, everything changed. Part 2, the diagnosis. It started with headaches. Small ones at first, easy to ignore. Marcus blamed stress, poor sleep, too much coffee, but the headaches grew worse. Then came the dizziness. Then the days he couldn't get out of bed without the room spinning around him. Alina finally convinced him to see a doctor. What followed was a blur of scans, waiting rooms and doctors speaking in careful, measured tones that somehow made the news feel even heavier. The diagnosis was a rare and aggressive form of brain cancer. The doctor sat across from Marcus and Alina, folded his hands, and delivered the words that would change everything. Based on the size and location of the tumor and how quickly it's progressing, we're looking at approximately 6 months. 6 months. Marcus remembers staring at a small crack in the ceiling tile above the doctor's head, focusing on it so intensely that it felt like the only solid thing left in a world that had just been pulled out from under him. Alina broke down beside him. Marcus, strangely, felt numb, not devastated in the way he expected, just numb, as though his mind refused to process something that large all at once. Part 3, the collapse. The first few weeks after the diagnosis were the darkest of Marcus's life. He canceled plans. He stopped answering calls from friends who didn't know what to say to him anyway. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every mistake, every missed opportunity, every moment he had wasted assuming there would always be more time. He watched his daughter play in the living room one afternoon, laughing at something on the television, completely unaware that her father had just been given an expiration date. Marcus sat in the doorway and cried silently, not wanting her to see him fall apart. He thought about all the things he hadn't done. He had never taken Sophie to the ocean, even though she had asked a dozen times. He had never told his own father that he loved him, not directly, not in so many words. He had never started that business, always telling himself there would be time later, always choosing comfort over risk. For nearly a month, Marcus drowned in grief and regret. He later described that period as the closest he ever came to giving up entirely, not just on fighting the cancer, but on living at all. Part 4, the turning point. The shift happened on a night that seemed, on the surface, completely unremarkable. Marcus couldn't sleep. He walked outside onto the small back porch of his house and sat down under a sky full of stars. He thought about the 6 months he had left, and for the first time since the diagnosis, he asked himself a different question. Not why is this happening to me, but what am I going to do with the time I have left? That single shift in the question changed everything. He realized that he had spent 34 years of his life assuming time was infinite. He had wasted so many days waiting for the right moment, the right amount of savings, the right circumstances, before finally chasing the things that mattered. And now, with an actual number staring back at him, he understood something most people never truly grasp until it's too late. Time was never infinite. It never had been. He had simply been lucky enough not to know the number before. That night, Marcus made a decision. He wasn't going to spend his remaining time waiting to die. He was going to spend it learning, for the first time in his adult life, how to truly live. Part 5, choosing to fight. The next morning, Marcus called his doctor and asked a question he hadn't thought to ask before. "What are my options?" The doctor explained that the prognosis was grim, but not entirely without possibility. There were aggressive treatment options, experimental therapies, and lifestyle changes that, while not guaranteed to extend his life significantly, gave him a fighting chance. Marcus decided to pursue every single option available to him. He started an intense treatment plan that left him weak and nauseated for days at a time. He completely overhauled his diet, cutting out processed foods and sugar, something his oncologist said might support his body's ability to handle treatment. He started walking every single day, even when it felt impossible, because he had read that consistent movement helped patients maintain strength during aggressive treatment. But the physical changes were only part of the transformation. Marcus also began changing the way he thought. He started keeping a journal, writing down everything he was grateful for each morning before treatment. He reconnected with old friends he had lost touch with over the years. He finally called his father and told him, in plain words, how much he loved him and how much his sacrifices throughout Marcus's childhood had meant to him. He took Sophie to the ocean for the first time. He remembers standing on the beach watching her run toward the waves, laughing with a freedom he hadn't felt himself in years, and thinking that even if this was the only good memory he had left to create, it would have been worth everything. Part 6, the business he never started, somewhere in the middle of his treatment, weak, exhausted, and uncertain of how much time he actually had left. Marcus did something that surprised everyone around him. He started the small business he had dreamed about for over a decade, but had always been too afraid to pursue. It was a small woodworking shop, something he had always loved but never taken seriously as a career. Friends and family gently questioned the decision. Why start something new when he was fighting for his life? Marcus's answer became one of the defining philosophies of his story. If I have 6 months left, I'm not going to spend them being afraid of failure anymore. Fear doesn't matter when you understand how limited time actually is. He built his first few pieces in his garage between treatment sessions, working slowly, resting often, but refusing to let his diagnosis stop him from creating something that had been sitting inside him for years. Part 7, the 6 months passed. 6 months came and went. Marcus was still alive. He was weaker than before, still undergoing treatment, still facing an uncertain future, but he was alive. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. The aggressive treatment combined with his lifestyle changes had slowed the progression of the disease significantly, buying him more time than anyone had originally predicted. Marcus didn't celebrate by resting. He celebrated by continuing to build the life he had started creating during those 6 months. He continued growing his small woodworking business. He continued strengthening his relationship with Sophie and Alina. He continued treating every single day as something precious instead of something guaranteed. 1 year became 2. 2 years became 5. 5 years became 10. Part 8, 20 years later, 20 years after his original diagnosis, Marcus stood on a stage in front of a room full of people, sharing his story for the first time publicly. His hair had grayed. His hands, still strong from decades of woodworking, trembled slightly as he held the microphone, not from illness, but from the emotional weight of everything he was about to share. His small woodworking shop had grown into a respected local business, employing several people from his community, many of whom had faced their own hardships and found purpose working alongside a man who understood what it meant to fight for a second chance. Sophie, once a laughing 6-year-old on a beach, was now a grown woman standing in the audience. Watching her father speak about a diagnosis that had almost taken him away from her before she ever had the chance to truly know him. Marcus told the room something that had become the foundation of his entire philosophy on life. They told me I had 6 months. For a long time, I believed that number defined me. But somewhere along the way, I realized the number was never the point. The point was what I chose to do with whatever time I had, whether that turned out to be 6 months or 60 years. Part 9, the lesson. Marcus's story is not simply about surviving cancer. It's about what happens when a person finally understands, deeply and completely, that time is the only resource none of us can ever get back. Most people live their entire lives assuming they have unlimited time. They wait for the right moment to repair broken relationships. They wait for the right circumstances to start the business they've always dreamed about. They wait for some future version of themselves who finally has enough courage, enough money, enough certainty to start truly living. Marcus's diagnosis stripped away that illusion in the cruelest way possible. But in doing so, it gave him something most people never receive until it's far too late: clarity. He often said that receiving that diagnosis was, in a strange and painful way, the greatest gift he ever received, because it forced him to stop sleepwalking through his own life. Part 10, what this means for you if you are watching this today. You likely don't have a doctor telling you how much time you have left. But that doesn't mean your time is any less limited than Marcus's was. None of us know how many days we actually have. We simply choose to live as though the number is infinite, until something forces us to confront the truth. You don't need a diagnosis to start living the way Marcus eventually learned to live. You don't need a crisis to finally call the people you love and tell them what they mean to you. You don't need a countdown to finally start the business, the dream, the relationship, the version of your life you've been putting off for someday. Someday is not a guarantee. It never was. Marcus lived 20 more years, not because medicine alone saved him, though it played its part, but because he made a decision on an ordinary night, under an ordinary sky, to stop waiting and start living. You have that same choice available to you right now, in this exact moment, without needing a doctor's appointment to force your hand. Part 11, final words. Marcus passed away peacefully, many years after that stage speech, surrounded by his family, having lived a life far richer and fuller than the 6 months he was originally promised. At his funeral, Sophie stood up and shared something her father had told her many years earlier, something that had stayed with her every single day since. He told me that the tragedy isn't dying. The tragedy is living your whole life as though you have unlimited time, and then realizing, too late, that you never truly lived at all. That is the story of the man who was given 6 months to live and chose to spend the next 20 years finally, truly, completely alive. May his story remind you of the same truth he discovered under that quiet night sky. Time is not guaranteed, but the choice to truly live, starting today, always is.